About 6 miles north of downtown Concord, New Hampshire, is the village of Penacook. Now, Penacook, which was originally called Fisherville, is actually not a separate town, but part of the city of Concord. Penacook gets its name from the tribe of Native Americans which used to inhabit this land where the Penacook River meets the Merrimack River. Now, since most of the land south of here to Concord is really pastoral farmland, Penacook is really the first location north of Concord which was a notable railroad location. And the railroad here was laid as the Northern Railroad opened to Lebanon in 1847, eventually became part of the Boston and Lowell in 1884, and was absorbed into the Boston and Maine around 1890. Now, here in Penacook there used to be a passenger station, although that was probably torn down sometime after World War II. But the freight house, as you can see, is still here, and it was most recently used as a secondary warehouse for Rivco, a window manufacturing firm located just up the road here in Penacook. Rivco was served by the Boston and Maine, and later Guilford, and in 1985 the New England Southern Railroad, a local short line, was granted track rights up here to Penacook, and they served the area until 1992. The Penacook Freight House was also the site of a serious wreck which occurred here on April 26, 1967. Southbound freight JB4 running from White River Junction to Boston was crossing the bridge here over the Penacook River when suddenly they were diverted into the siding at speed and into a boxcar. There were no fatalities, but the place was a mess with freight cars piled up every which way. GP7 1560 was leading, and the second unit, F7 4265B, was pushed into the rear of the GP7. As a result, the rear of 1560 had to be rebuilt and repainted solid maroon, but never did receive replacement yellow striping. The third unit, Alco RS3 number 1517, the trailing diesel, fared the worst. It ended up on its side, damaging part of the freight house platform. All three engines were eventually returned to service. Because of the severity of the wreck, the Boston and Maine had to bring in 2 wreck cranes, a steam crane and a diesel crane, to help clean up the wreck. It was discovered by the Boston and Maine that the cause of the wreck in 1967 was this switch stand. A group of teenagers shot the lock off with a rifle and switched the track to the freight house siding, causing the freight to go into the siding at track speed. Ironically, the Boston and Maine a few months earlier had just removed the CTC signaling on the Northern. Had they left it in place, it's possible the wreck would never have occurred. The last heavy rail activity here in Penacook was around 1992 and 1993, when Guilford Rail System started ripping up the Northern north of Boscawen. New England Southern Railroad brought up empty gondola cars which they dropped here on the sidings in Penacook, and Guilford used a trackmobile to bring the gondolas north on the line as they scrapped it. The very last train to ever come up here to Penacook was in 2007 during the reunion of the New England Southern Railroad employees. Across the Penacook River from the freight house location is this extremely historic spot for both Penacook and the Northern Railroad. This is the old Stratton and Company flour mill, built before the Civil War in 1857 by the John H. Pearson Company of Concord. By 1902, this was the busiest flour mill in New England, producing daily 300 barrels of flour and 500 bushels of cornmeal. Originally, they would use teams of oxen to carry the freight cars from the mill up to the Northern Railroad and back, but eventually got so busy here they had to invest in steam locomotives. Perhaps the most famous steam locomotive that was used here at the mill was 440 American Type number 3, which had originally been built for the Woodstock Railroad of Vermont. This was its last assignment, and it stayed here until the mill closed about 1951. Eventually, the mill here was purchased by the Allied Bresner Tannery Company, and they used it as a secondary location to unload animal hides and treat them before bringing them up the hill to their main site in Penacook. The Boston and Maine last served this tannery in the 1970s, and the plant closed for good in 1987. As you can see now, the process to demolish the disintegrating building has begun, and pretty soon this spot will be completely wiped away from history. In later years, the tannery used a trackmobile to shuttle cars to and from the plant, and the interchange and yard was located right behind me here. The northern line currently ends about 1/4 of a mile behind me up in a field in Bosquen, and there's the northern rail trail all the way to Lebanon. But the tracks from here south are actually currently being used by Scenic Rail Riders, a tourist company that offers scenic rail bike rides throughout the year.